The sun has left and
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. The reason I call myself a story maker is because throughout my day, I am consciously noticing things. I'm consciously choosing certain actions and behaviors because I know that these are the potential stories for the future. And when I think about it that way, it helps inform my behavior in ways that are in alignment with how I want to be known and experienced. This leads right into today's episode with my new friend, Will Maurer, that I met when he spoke at the TEDx Billings event in Montana just a few weeks before we're recording this podcast episode. And the reason this is such a good combination of story and personal brand and perception is because Will's talk was about how screen time affects young children, particularly under the age of 2, and what we can do differently to reduce harm and possibly even improve outcomes. Now, if you think about it this way, you can look back at the patterns in your life, the stories that you've created, and how they've affected the people around you that you love and care about. So, welcome to the show, Will. I'm so glad that you agreed to spend this time with me.
Oh, I love this. Thank you so much for having me, and congrats on your TEDx talk. Very exciting. Welcome to the club.
Thank you. And for our listeners, Will is referring to the TEDx U Street Women event that I spoke at on November 3rd. So when this episode goes live, it will have been probably about a week or two since I actually was on the stage myself. So that actually gives our listeners some context for today's conversation, because we'll definitely bring in some of what it takes to get to that point and why your TEDx resonated. And my hope is that our listeners will be inspired, A, directly by what you have to say, and B, to understand that everyone can take something that they're experiencing and choose to do something differently and inspire others by solving their own problem.
Absolutely. That was a big part of it for me. Was I'm a new father, at the start of the pandemic, and really, my son had colic for the first year, and we didn't have much help because of the pandemic. We looked at, what do we do about screen time? When do we jump into this? When do we introduce it? And what do we introduce? How do we do it? And me and my wife like to research everything we do. And as we started to get into some of the guidelines and the guidance around this, which, this topic has been debated for more than 60 years. It's fascinating. And I'm like, okay, great. So there has to be a solution somewhere in here, right? What do we do? And, the one thing I found was the solution is don't do it, more prohibition than anything. And, after reading more research on this topic and being a product of the screen myself growing up, the screens were always on from my earliest memories. And, screens even inspired my career. The cartoons that raised me, I say, they inspired my career because for over 20 years, I've been in the entertainment industry. So when I found out that screen time has been linked to a lot of developmental issues, especially the younger, the more severe, it caused me to take a pause and really try to get to the root of the arguments here and find a solution.
Mm-hmm. That's what I loved about your talk, was you started with a story. It's 2020. We have this new baby. He's colicky, and we can't find the resources we need for help.
Yeah. As so many parents can relate to. It's a very relatable, understandable topic, and one that I wish there were more,
right,
more solutions.
More resources.
more resources. And the big thing is, what there is a lot of shame and anxiety from parents,
Yes.
and just that sense of hopelessness, or, well, everybody else is doing this, and anywhere I go, there's a phone in a baby's hand. So, it must be okay. And what else am I supposed to do? And, that's what really drove me to action, because that I resonate with that sense of what are you supposed to do?
Right.
Becoming a new parent is already a difficult, a new challenge, and you're forced to quickly learn a lot. So what do you do in the difficult situations? And yeah, how do we create change? And that's when I really understood, wow, this is not just a singular, there's not one way to fix this. This is a whole systemic issue that needs to be addressed and tackled on multiple fronts. And that's the work that I've committed to over the last 5 years. So
I love that you use the word prohibition, because it immediately brought to mind parents who say, don't do this.
right.
And what does that immediately do, especially with a toddler or a teenager? They're going to go do it the moment you say no. The book Forever by Judy Blume came out when I think I was in 6th grade. And I remember my mother saying, I don't think you're ready for this. My friends and I were reading it in our book club, and let me read it first. And meanwhile, it had already made the rounds through the bus.
Right.
And you know what was marked in that book? The dirty parts.
Right.
And I'm air quoting the dirty parts of the book, where they're experimenting with touching and oral sex. And I remember laughing to myself when my mom said, I don't want you to read the book yet, because I had already read all the parts that she was concerned about. Right.
Right.
And so when we tell parents it's a prohibition, and are they going to pass that along to their kids? No, you're not allowed. Don't touch, don't see. And then what do they do when they go to their friends' homes? I had a problem with that, because there were certain video games I didn't want our boys playing. The first-person shooter games made me very uncomfortable. The Call of Duty, and their friends' parents were letting them play it. So what did they do when they went to their friends' houses? They just didn't tell me they were playing it.
Yeah.
I'd find out later, and then we'd have discussions about why, and they would assure me that they weren't being desensitized. They're smart enough to know what I was concerned about. But I love that you use the word prohibition, because that was what I took away from your talk, was we can say no screen time if they're under 2, but that is totally unrealistic.
Right.
It's like saying, don't have sex before marriage to teenagers that have no frontal cortex, because it's in the middle of transforming and sloughing off all those brain cells and neural pathways so that they can rebuild them. Saying don't do something makes it harder, I think.
Yeah.
So when you think about the research itself, I am excited to be able to share that when it goes live on YouTube, on the Vimeo channel for TEDx. And I don't want to give too much away, because I think our listeners will really take so much from it when they watch it. But I do want to talk about is the story of how you went there, how you realized this was such an important thing, and then how you managed to create yours was what, 16 minutes or so?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. How you created a 16-minute talk that would be as clear as it was, because I knew exactly what you wanted to come across. And also leave everybody curious to learn more and to do their own experimentation, and maybe encourage people to spend money on research on this, which is kind of your ultimate goal, is we need to research this more and differently.
Yes.
So let's start with you're at your wit's end, you and your wife, you need a break, and you're about to expose your child to screen time. What was that? Do you remember it?
there were with the colic, there were the first year, the longest period of sleep consecutive was 3 hours. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with colic, but the screams are what you remember, not the sleeplessness. It's the cries and the screams. And that's a form of communication. And for a parent, it's frustrating because we don't know how to solve.
How do we interpret this?
Yeah. What exactly? So even after the colic passed, we still, you still have the PTSD of the screams and oh, is everything okay? But for us, it was, how do we, one thing I've found in my research is screens are used for many different reasons, right? And the one thing we were looking is like, when do we just have 5 minutes to take a break, or just have some time, and what's appropriate within that? Are there certain shows, or how do we do that, and what do we set up? Just wanting to really understand kind of this particular issue, because obviously when we were kids, it wasn't as big of an issue. It was more the violence in it, but now it's the attention grabbing and all the techniques that are used to create that addiction, spike the dopamine, and keep a kid, glued to the screen. So I had enough of that awareness to know, let's look at what's proper in this. And then, coming from the entertainment industry for 20 years, I didn't quite understand what was happening behind the scenes from that top level, in terms of the research companies that come in and help create that attention grabbing, those techniques. So for us, it was sitting down, understanding, and then, that moment of just needing that, like, wait, there's the TV right there. When do we do this? Is it, I think it's time. Let's look at this. And that's when the research began. And before we did that, we just started the research. And when I tell you it's a rabbit hole, you go in every direction and you hear all different voices. But ultimately, everything leads back to no screen time before 2 from the experts, if you're looking for that expert advice. But the data doesn't, and the realities of parenting don't align with that. So that's when I was like, okay, there's a major gap here. And where's the middle of this? And there wasn't a middle. That was the thing that I kept trying to find. I'm like, where's the middle? Where do we go?
Why is this an all or nothing binary approach? So when you, I keep coming back to when my boys were little, and we loved Baby Einstein.
Yeah.
It was simple, and the music was great, and they had very simple animations, and the boys liked it, but it didn't seem like they were addicted, for lack of a better word. They weren't so engaged in the screen that they didn't look away. They were still playing with their blocks, even if it was going on. So what was something that you felt comfortable showing your son?
Well, it's quite interesting what he gravitated to early on, but it was, we were looking for low stimulation, which means, trying to limit the amount of camera movements, action within the scenes, the amount of cuts, colors, just visual and audio effects that, unfortunately, if you turn on preschool media or baby media, it's like walking into a Vegas casino. It's like,
It's
things happening everywhere. The sounds.
Pee-wee's Great Adventure, right?
Right. Yeah. So we were looking for something opposite. And on YouTube, he really took a liking to this channel where they restore old cars. So, this is a 1-year-old watching sandblasting and taking pieces apart and slowly, brushing,
polishing,
polishing.
Yeah.
A painting, very slow, calming, but it was soothing. And it also, he didn't want the TV. Even to this day, he's 5. And when we're like, let's watch a movie, let's do, do something in front of it. No, I want to play Legos. I want to draw. I want to do art. So, which is great. And we encourage that. But
that speaks volumes right there. Right.
But it's also, that lesson in parenting, as you're going through it, you see, and the great thing for us was we spent almost every second with our son for the first 2 years. Because of COVID, we were together all the time. So you really see the developmental patterns, and you really get to know your child and interact and learn their language before we could share a language, right? And for me, that was one of the most important things, is that screen time is not just about a babysitter. It's not a digital babysitter. It's how do parents learn with their kid at the same time, but use it as a bridge to bridge that learning experience, right? So, and if, a parent uses it as a babysitter, what's a harm reduction approach to that? How can we make sure that what's on screen is slow, soothing, more appropriate, age appropriate, on the different ages?
Every time I think about this conversation and your TED Talk, I think about how our son, when he was 3, was just completely enthralled by a documentary called Volcano. And it was like a 2 or 3 VHS tape series. It was a huge, long 8 hours of video of Stacy Keach narrating volcanoes. And they were tracking and explaining the biggest eruptions in recorded history and telling the story of it.
Yeah.
And he was I would say, what do you want to do? Volcano, watch Volcano movie.
Yeah.
So I keep coming back to that, because he wasn't asking for Blue's Clues or Dora the Explorer. He was asking for the Volcano movie.
Right. Because from an early age, he probably was introduced to more mindful media, media that didn't overstimulate. And then you fall into that dopamine, I'm here to get my dopamine spike that I am used to. It's more of a actual tool in that regard, where there's, documentaries are typically slower pacing, slower shots, more narrative in the in the storytelling. So those are great examples.
When you think of one of the first steps you took externally, so you and your wife, you're studying all this stuff, you're realizing there's a huge gap between the all or nothing approach. Was it, what was your first step to taking this to a different level?
There were multiple steps within that, but we quickly realized, in order to create the change we want to see, we need to create it. It doesn't exist. And we looked everywhere, and there are the random YouTube shows where there's someone building a house and their camera's just there and locked off and very slow in that approach. But that's not, is a 1 month old, or a 1 year old or a 6 month old, are they absorbing anything? And is a parent able to co-view and add to that experience? And we said, looking at the majority of the research that's been done, it was frustrating, because yes, you're using content that we already know to be harmful. It's already been said to be harmful because of overstimulating elements of production techniques, but that same material is being used over and over in research to prove a point. And it's let's create alternative media, more mindful, something that is more of a bridge, more pro-social, play-based, no cuts, no stimulation, or no overstimulation, proper stimulation that a parent and a child can co-view and co-learn from. So that's what we did. I was fortunate, coming 20-year animation executive, to be in a position to have the resources and the tools and the knowledge through research, and having conversations with researchers and experts and educators, and fully starting to understand how the system is set up to block support for these more mindful alternatives. Because with the prohibition, you can't do it. I remember the first time I said, I'm going to make more mindful media content for a 1 year old, and I felt horrible. the interaction did not go well, and it was with somebody I respected from
It's
the academia world, and they just said, "How dare you? That you're
yeah,
part of the
it's like
problem."
saying, I'm going to teach them how to smoke cigarettes.
Right. And that's how it's set up, and that's how, and I'm like, but I really feel like there's something that we can
There's something
offer that
missing
is
here.
better,
Right.
that's missing, and why is that bad? Like, why, and just that reaction was like, it really hit
Shame.
me hard.
They're trying to
I
shame
felt like I was doing, like I was now,
a drug dealer.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I was creating these addictions, and because I had this idea, I was trying to exploit it, and I was, had the wrong intentions, and
It's
that hit
crazy.
me hard. And I really had to go back and step and say, no, I think I understand enough of the research. I'm a parent. I understand the parenting issues, and I have a lot of friends who are parents who are also have the same issues, and I know hundreds of millions of people are watching Cocomelon, and I know what, not to get into certain, call out any specific content, but I know what these things are engineered to do now. I know enough about it. And why is this a bad thing? And I had to really challenge that back in myself, but then back to the community and say, luckily I'm from Philadelphia, so I don't, I stand up to a good challenge. I'm like, let's talk about this, let's debate it. We're not going to lay down and just accept that. And so what is the problem? And the hardest thing through that process was what the current guidelines have done to support anything different, anything from a harm reduction standpoint, or getting into more robust research to say this is evidence-based now. We've done a lot of our own internal research, but until it's third-party verified, you want that validation. But the hardest thing is that the funding is really, from distributors to researchers to foundations who are here to support families and help children. They say, well, we already know that it's already been said this is a problem, so what, we can't support you making this or researching this. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it myself, and then, I have to pay for independent research, but that's the path that I've taken. I believe in this, and I believe it can help parents and children, and that's, this is what it's all about.
And it's not only 2 and under. I mean, if you
Yeah.
start researching from there, then you can also influence how things happen from 3 to 5 and
Absolutely.
appropriate screen time. I think that's where we're really missing a big part of this, because parents are going to use screen time.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, when they start that early, it continues with, they only have bad options to begin with, and then it continues to spiral from there. So we as a society, we put a lot of money into addressing issues after the fact, once they become a thief. And if we could get to a child not being so overstimulated or addicted to this media from an earlier age, what could that look like as children go forward?
Right.
So the prohibition, obviously I agree with, children learn best with out in the world, exploring, with parents, playing. That's the ultimate, right? If that can happen, that's the preference. But we also have to be aware of the reality, and we have to give parents alternatives. So that's the goal here
Right.
And like you said, yes, once we understand this and address this at that age, then there's opportunities to continue to evolve and create more mindful programming for the older kids. But it is difficult. And then one thing I hear is my kid won't watch something slow, or, they just, but that's what happens once you're turned
It's too
on.
late. Right.
Too late.
But if you start young, if you're going to show them anything, show them that. Right.
And it's never too late, but it's a really hard job to get to reverse an addiction.
Right. Wow. Something just popped into my head as you were talking about this, this prohibition, this black and white screen time is bad if they're under 2. And there's another aspect of this that just occurred to me, is that when you say that, and then you do things like put the grandparents on a Zoom call with the baby, that's screen time. And people don't seem to have a problem with that.
Right. Well,
So
part of it again is within the guidelines. The guidelines are no screen time for under 2, with the exception of, Zooming or screen timing with a relative or someone safe, a friend, an adult. And to me that's fine. That makes sense. But within that guideline and that caveat, there's also, if you're going to do it, a lot of the experts say PBS Kids is a great place to, if you're going to show your 6-month-old or 1-month-old, PBS Kids is a trusted resource. And what the majority of the research and the guidelines fail to acknowledge is that it's not the educational nature of the show that is the problem. Even though, shows with violence, that is a big problem, but a lot of young shows don't have violence that much anymore, or mockery or harm. But the production techniques are what are now used. That's the hook. It's like I equate it to a diet, right? If you put fillers and sugars and those harmful ingredients in the food no longer, you could disguise it as something, but it's what's inside that matters. What are the ingredients? And the one thing that hardly ever gets talked about is the ingredients of the production. And there's enough studies now from media companies who are employing this tactic across all of these shows. That's why all the preschool shows, when you look at them, fast. It's like, even as an adult, I'm like, whoa, what is happening? This is chaos after chaos, because they know that's how you capture the attention. That's how you spike the dopamine.
So they're doing the research that's causing the damage. They're using it. Yeah, they're leveraging it to keep kids watching, rather than using that to understand how to lower that.
Right. Because their business model is attention. The more views, the more streams, the more likes, etc.
More advertising.
So that's the business model of preschool. And I think once parents really start to understand that's the model and this is what these studios are doing, because they have to in order to survive. It's, if they're in that business, I think they'll begin to choose more mindful alternatives, and the kids starting earlier will, go along.
Especially, I think that what has to happen is it has to be a systemic change in that they choose to use that research to change in positive ways, and then they attract the advertisers that are in alignment with that.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where change happens, right? But change happens, luckily, with the parents. Once parents understand, and this is because there's so much content out there, and so many voices and so many opinions and so many experts. It's just hard. A parent doesn't, to go into years of research to really dive into what's happening here is difficult. And even just getting the messaging out. That's why it was important for me to summarize this, because I have a 90-minute presentation that I do when I talk to foundations or researchers or universities or studios about this, because you have to go into all the elements that combine to make this a problem. But it was a great challenge, as I'm sure you've also just encountered, getting that message concise and impactful so that it can be used for good. And actually my what really got me interested in this research and going down the rabbit hole was a TEDx talk that on this topic. And I was like, whoa, this really, was a great job of breaking down a lot of these core complex issues and saying, these are the reasons why kids are addicted and why parents are, kind of left without relevant choices.
Who was this? Do you remember the name? I want to put a link in the show notes associated with this episode.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was Dimitri Christakis, who I just recently had an opportunity to chat with. And but really inspired me on my path into this field, and then to share my knowledge and my research on a TEDx stage as well.
Great. We'll definitely put the link to that in there. So there are a couple things that are coming up for me before we kind of shift a little bit into the TED Talk plan. And I don't want to go too long, but there are two things that stood out for me that I think we need to just express a little bit for our listeners. One is when you said, yes, the prohibition actually does make exceptions for video calls with grandparents or whatever. But in my experience, those exceptions aren't the things that people hear about.
Right.
They only hear about no screen time. And as an example, I was reading the book The New Menopause, and one of the things she talked about was how the data was skewed. Not the data was skewed, but the interpretation of it was skewed.
Right.
And nobody went back to the original data to understand that interpretation. They just went with it. And the media jumped on it. You increase risk of breast cancer by 25% if you do this. And that's big. Nobody wants breast cancer. But Marie Claire, I forget her name. Again, I'll put the link into the show notes. But one of the things she said was, what they were saying was that of women, 4 in 100 are going to get breast cancer. And this was a statistic, I think from 99 when they did this big study. And that is a common number, right? That works. But then the risk went up to 5 in 100, or 5 in 100, 5 in 1,000, whatever it was. The difference is that from 4 to 5 is 25%, but not out of 100 or out of 1,000.
Right.
That changes it completely. But the media jumped on this 25% increased risk. So I think it's the same with the research about no screen time. Oh, except you can do this. But what they're doing is they're saying, no screen time, because they don't want to confuse people. That's the impression I get. They don't think people can critically think about what the exceptions are and be able to make their own decisions.
And that is a problem, right? Instead of just saying, here's the pros, the cons, what to look for, how to, make better decisions if you're going to, that black and white, that very rigid statement.
It's easier that way.
Yeah.
Except that it's not. So the other thing that popped into my head was that moment. I think this is an important part of your story that I don't remember if it was part of your TED Talk, but for the next one or for your next talk, the moment when you expressed to a colleague that you wanted to find research for this or start research for this or fund research for this, and they tried to shame you like you were a drug dealer, like you were thinking about the next most addictive cigarette for teenagers.
Right.
When you walked away from that, have you been able to be in a conversation with that person since then? And B, how do you address that internally? You said that it was painful. It was a painful moment. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the best way to address it is to persevere and show, right? Show by actions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're working toward. And it's hard to change everybody's minds, right? You don't want to spend 80% of your time, convincing the 10%.
And the people that aren't your audience.
Right. So, it's about finding the advocates, the people who believe in the mission and can help elevate and support that. The big things around the research here are researchers, and I'll share a link with you, but the American Psychological Association did a review of all the publicly available policy statements in 2019, and they found a long list around screen time in young children, and they found a long list of issues that were really significant. And that was like, why is that? And the amount of issues they found, a lot of them, really held on to the harmful effects, but it completely ignored any beneficial effect. Zero mention of it, nothing. The statement was it's only harmful and screen time is bad for many reasons, right? So, but what are the, I'm like, what are the potential beneficial effects? You know, and that's the shared bonding, the co-learning, the bringing a parent and a child together through that experience, and the ability for infants to potentially learn through properly produced media. And that's where I focused in on more was that, and that's where I'm looking at creating those solutions around. But you know, you have to use pain as fuel and not be angry. You have to just say, great, you know, I'm going to hopefully show you that your ideas are different than mine, and that's okay. But that you can't discredit my ideas here.
I love that. Are
Yeah.
you in touch with them still, or is that kind of you're giving it some space?
Giving it some space. You know, I've left the door open and wanted to share as I've gone along and created some of these solutions, and have been doing our own internal research to share that. But you know, the other thing I found is, look, if your whole career is built on research that you've authored and has been taken as the authority in that space, it's difficult to go back and say, oops, I might have been wrong. You know, I might have overlooked this or overlooked that. So there's a real doubling down on, I don't want to know anything other than what I've built my career on for 30 years. And I'm going to take this to the grave, you know, which is unfortunate. But I feel like these things change and evolve, not through, you know, the friction and the finger pointing, but through the conversations and really showing. The proof is in the pudding. So let's get that out there, and then let's start talking about it. And it's unfortunate we can't have conversations that, you know, like this, and really debate the ideas without being shamed or thrown under a bus or demonized. But
I keep coming back to this idea that they're going to do it. Right. Parents are going to show their kids, and it's not just parents. They're going to be exposed to it to their older siblings,
grandparents, relatives.
They're going to be exposed to screen time. So let's reduce the harm by being conscious of what they're actually being exposed to. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're back to this whole TED Talk thing. And I'm going to start by asking the question that I usually start the episode with, which is sharing something about yourself that most people might not know about you. And I ask this question to add some complexity so people aren't associating you with only one aspect of who you are.
Interesting. Okay, well,
it's your and.
There's a lot there, but I will go off of our earlier conversation, which I didn't know about you, which is that you are a musician, and I was a musician as well. I moved from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. It brought me out here 25 years ago to be a musician. I went to Musicians Institute and was a recording engineer. I was in a band, and we had a first look deal, and did the whole touring of the Sunset Strip for years, and you know, got to work with some of my heroes in that industry, which was just like, wow, this is amazing. It's a difficult industry to be in, and being in LA, someone said, come over here and help me one day. And I got to do that, and that was on the Rugrats, and that transitioned me from music to animation and entertainment. And my career started there. They actually said, do you know how to make coffee? And I said, no. They're like, I was like, but I can learn how to do that. And I did. And long story short, the coffee career didn't last too long because there was a big giant size Costco, you know, one you need what is the thing to open a tin can?
A can opener?
There you go. Thank you. A can opener, but there wasn't one in the studio, and everybody.
Now we're both in menopause.
I know, exactly. Here we go. But everybody's freaking out because there was no coffee. So I took a big butcher. There was one of those because they cut birthday cakes, and I trying to open it that way because I could feel, okay, people need their coffee. the stress. And I ended up needing a few stitches. And I said, all right, you're not doing coffee anymore. Go sit with the writer and take notes. And that, really started my career. Those two events really got me into this industry. And that's where, I'm able to continue the work I've done for 20 years in that industry and now use it to reform the children's media industry.
Stitches.
Yes.
Remind me not to let you use a big knife at my house.
No, I've learned, you live and you learn, but
yeah.
But that event, you really, transitioned me into a whole different side of the industry from, running around and getting food and coffee to sitting with the writer and hearing how he formulates stories and taking all the notes and then having those discussions. I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing. Wow, this is
a job. I could get paid for this.
Right. And that
okay, listeners, we're not inspiring you to go get a big gash in your hand so that you can get stitches so that you can get a new job. Don't do that. That's not the lesson here.
You'll put the disclaimer up before.
That's not the lesson here. That's hilarious. I love that you're a musician. And that probably also helped you, like it helped me, in preparation for your TED Talk.
Yes. Being on the stage is never easy. No matter how many times you do it, at least for me, it's always like, but we both, I think, had many months to rehearse and get our script down and just like you, I'm getting my script done right away. I want to tackle that. I'm a writer. I want to make sure the story and the message are clear and powerful. And then it's like, how do you memorize 16 minutes if you've never done it before? And I remember doing my press originally for TEDx when I did that, and I had to write a 1-minute press release. I couldn't memorize it, and I only had a week to memorize it. But I was like, how am I gonna do this if I can't memorize this 1-minute thing? I'm great at talking about this, but that's easy. But the getting to the point quick, clarity. It's like, whoa, and that really. Thank God I had that experience of having to do the press because I'm like, I really need to spend enough time memorizing this, which means getting your script done early and approved and locking that in and, no different than a traditional production.
Well, you did it. You did a great job. I mean, it was so compelling. My mom is a baby nurse and we talked a lot about it after that. Every speaker at TEDx brought something that we talked about later. And we have to mention the reason I was there is my client, Anna Kazmarowski, was also one of the speakers. And her talk was about how complicated we are, that we are not this or that, we are and. Yeah, and I loved her ending. I'm not just, what was it? I'm not only, I'm and so are you. So reducing us to labels and how that doesn't work. Anyway, quick shout out to Anna.
Yeah.
So with mine, it was interesting too. I always said that I don't like memorizing things because I've done keynotes but I realized later that was ironic because I memorize lyrics all the time. But what I said was, I don't like memorizing. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel authentic to me. And as I went through this process, it was so amazing because it changed how I teach public speaking. I have a completely different program now than what I did a year ago. Well, it was because I started with this 5-minute pitch at the semifinals for the TEDx U Street Women back in September of 24. And when I came pretty close to memorizing it, it wasn't completely memorized, but I had practiced it. I knew what I wanted to say. And when I got up there to do this 5-minute pitch, I felt very confident. And I realized that I had a little bit of luxury because I wasn't thinking about what I was going to say next. Yeah. I could actually engage with the audience. I could look right at them because I didn't have to worry about, what am I going to say next? And I thought, well, that's different. That's interesting. And then I had to drop it down to 3 minutes for the finals in February. And when
Perfect song length, right?
it is
Yeah.
exactly. And when I crafted that and memorized it and then delivered it, and my cousin was like, "Holy shit, Sarah, you nailed that." I remember realizing maybe I was using that whole "it's not authentic or organic" as an excuse.
Yeah.
Not because I'm not good at memorizing, even though that was something I told myself.
Yeah.
Which is silly. Again, I memorize 3-minute lyrics or 3-minute song lyrics all the time.
Right.
But even more importantly, I was giving myself that as an excuse because I don't like memorizing things. It's not fun, and I like fun.
Right. Yeah.
But what I realized through this experience is that when I started with my idea and crafted it down to a 3-minute talk, that I had a one-liner.
Yeah.
I had a couple of citations that helped give me the credibility in my talk. And it created so much clarity for me, not just for that 3-minute talk, but for my
branch out
business,
from,
for everything about who I am and my personal brand and what matters to me.
Yeah.
So now when I work with public speakers, we start with, what's your 3-minute talk?
Yeah.
Because if we can get a 3 to 5-minute talk with very clear specifications, who is your audience? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know about you? What of your stories can you tell quickly and easily and organically that will connect with that audience, that are part of your talk? Because, we can say the non sequitur stories that have nothing to do with what we're talking about. And what can you say in less than a minute that's going to be really memorable, that's going to make people want to hear more? How do you leave them curious? And when I did that with this first cohort that I worked with after I did my 3-minute pitch, they were blown away after the very first of 4 sessions.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm totally overthinking this. It was worth the investment for 1 session, and I have 3 more with you."
Well, and that's an important lesson, because people usually see the big picture, right? All the elements, and how do you boil that down to the core, and then take from that the most important elements and weave a story through that. And great musicians, great lyricists are very powerful, can do that. And then through my career in entertainment, film, and episodic, you start with your log line. And if people, what is that? But if they're hooked, you can expand. And now the characters, the story, the world, and you're always coming back to that foundation of the log line. And what is, where are we starting? What's the challenge and obstacles, and where are we going? And
exactly. Your why.
Yeah.
It comes right back down to your why, which is in your 3 minutes. The other thing that happens that has happened with my cohorts that I've taken through this program now, is that at the end of it, they have a 3 to 5 minute talk, for lack of a better word, description. I just did air quotes for the listeners that aren't watching the video. One of the things they loved about it was that one of my clients took that and made a 1-hour workshop out of it. So once you have that clarity, then you can expand it or contract it depending on the audience and the scenario. And it's still clear and solid.
Yes. And we owe it to the audience, right? To be clear and concise, and have a message that can be, there's a takeaway and there's action that can be done, whether that's personal or societal.
Exactly. Will, this has been as fun and entertaining as I knew it would be, and also great practical insights for parents that are listening, parents of young children or under 2. What's one thing that you would want them to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing is, trust yourself as a parent, right? It's there's enough do this, do that, enough shame, anxiety. trust yourself. And, you know, what I can offer from my research is the slower, the calmer, the less is more in early media. And obviously, you know, I agree. Screens are not the best use of a child's time. But if, and we know that they do happen for various different reasons, choose wisely, choose slow, choose, you know, very grounded, based in reality. You know, if there's something based in reality, that's the best. And Fred Rogers, you know, Mr. Rogers did an amazing job of this and fighting 60 years ago for that older generation, you know, the 3 to 5 year olds, the preschool age. But this hasn't really been tackled for the below threes. And I think it's so important. And, you know, it is hard to find stuff. So just be mindful of this stuff and share as much of that as you can with your kid, because that's the most important thing, is the bonding. The screen is a bridge.
I love that. I love that. I remember watching the Volcano movie with our older son. Not every time, because, you know, how many times can you watch one of those shows when you're not 3? But we would talk about it in the car, and he would talk about what he was learning from the Volcano movie and from the back seat of the car in his car seat.
And that's the bridge. It's happened, you know, that the screen time happened, but the lesson from that and the conversation continues. So that is a positive,
It absolutely is,
takeaway from that. And I'm sure as your son is watching it solo, he's remembering the conversations and the connection. You know, there's a shared moment there. And now a lot of content is just autoplay one to the next, and there's no continuity and there's no repetition and it's just how much can keep going. So repetition, bonding, and sharing that together is, you know, when it happens, those are the most important aspects.
That is great guidance and perfect reminder. And all of us can probably benefit from thinking about that, keeping that in our minds, because many of us have interactions with young children, even if we don't have young children at home.
Right.
Well, thank you so much again. This has been a treat.
Oh, likewise. Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited for your TEDx as well. So we'll have many things to share and celebrate.
Absolutely. Listeners, now it's your turn. What will you take away from this conversation? If you don't have young children at home, what can you do that's a little bit different to connect with the young children that you see around you? One of the things I say in my TED Talk is that we can connect with people around us through story easily and with total strangers. And one of the examples I gave was when you sit next to a family at a restaurant and you watch a child playing a familiar game or watching a familiar show, and you share a brief story that your kid loved that game too. This is your chance. Find ways to connect with the people around you through story, even when it has to do with screen time. Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time. You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.